Hello, and welcome to another episode of Will It Work? I'm Kevin. Today we're going to look at the original Xbox, just called Xbox. But, you know, Microsoft, in their attempt to not look second best to the PlayStation, rather than calling their second console Xbox 2, they went with Xbox 360, so it matched up against the PlayStation 3, even though it really was the Xbox 2. And then we had the Xbox 3, which Microsoft decided to call Xbox One, which really makes no freaking sense. But according to their logic in the beginning, they were like, well, we want this to be the one thing that you have in front of your TV. And they had all of these, these ideas of it being a multimedia center. Kinect was built into it. It had, sort of like a cable TV or domestic TV tuner thing on it and all of this sort of stuff in the beginning, but ultimately just became a game console. You could stream videos on it, of course, but most people use it as a game system. And today with Xbox 4, we have what they're now calling Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. Terrible, terrible naming. It's hard to even call these things anything. It's just like, do you have the Xbox? Yeah, I have the new one. That's what people do. And so now when you refer to the oldest of the group, you got to refer to it as the original Xbox. And even then, people think you're talking about the 360 half the time. It's kind of a problem. I remember I received a free Xbox as being part of the media. This was early on. I also received a free 360 at one point being part of the media. This was when Video Game News was a much bigger website at the time than most people realize. So I got this in the mail, and, I wasn't sure what to overall expect. I had heard that it was going to be running on a version of Windows CE and Compact Edition, and that it was supposed to be more like a PC. Ultimately, after having played it and the PlayStation 2, the Dreamcast, and the GameCube, I walked away feeling like the Xbox was the most powerful of the systems. When you look at the gameplay, it was far and away always the games with the most features and just better. And if you're a PlayStation guy, don't be mad about that or anything, because PlayStation, still won the war in terms of sales, still had far more games released for it, and it was certainly no slouch. I mean, everybody will tell you many good stories about playing games on the PlayStation 2. Problem with the PlayStation 2 is that it did have a bit of a memory bug in it, which caused some problems when you were trying to use some texture maps, which were important to 3D, and some of the graphical effects, and like a decent color palette. And so you would end up with like these lower resolution type of thing going on with these textures and such, in order to keep the game frame rate up, from what I understand. And you would end up with a lot of games that seemed very muddy and sort of washed out, very brown or gray kind of things. And it's not to say all games are like this. Not all games are trying to do 3D and that sort of thing, but many games were. And the PlayStation 2 just had some issues. And I often think back to the Dreamcast, because the PlayStation 2 had more memory, right? And everybody had really liked their PlayStation, and so they were really, looking forward to buying the PlayStation 2 when the price came down. When it first launched, nobody was really going to buy it. But eventually, people kind of came around and they were like, "Yeah, I'm going to buy a PlayStation 2." And people were thinking, well, the Dreamcast, Sega makes some cool games, but I want that PlayStation because I know that's going to be better. But and Sega kind of fell for that too, and it's a little bit unfortunate because they were doing pretty good in their sports line. Their 2K games at that time were doing really well for them, and they sold around 5 million Dreamcasts in the United States, which is kind of like the break-even point at that point. Like, you're kind of like, that's where you start making money on your games being sold, on your licensing, because you spend all this money making the console and launching the console and spending money on marketing and everything, and so you want to get about 5 million of them sold, so you recoup those costs in terms of game software sales. And people that owned Dreamcast tended to really like the Dreamcast. There was just a big market of people out there that weren't really into the Dreamcast. And one of the deficiencies that was cited about the Dreamcast versus like the PlayStation 2 was the fact that the PlayStation 2 had twice as much graphical memory, which is true. But the thing about the Dreamcast is that it used some texture compression, right? And so now you had this interesting problem that maybe they didn't know about at that time, was the fact that, like, they didn't know that Sony had this bug, right, where their textures were kind of muddied and very, larger resolution or whatever, and not as colorful. And so the color palette was more limited there for whatever reason. And so games looked better on the Dreamcast in a lot of cases, but people would point to polygon counts and things like that, and they would be like, there's more polygons in the PlayStation 2 version than the Dreamcast version, and yeah, absolutely, and there's a fluidity of movement there that's important and can make things look a lot better at certain times. But texture maps are really important. I talk about them all the time because when you're going in from this infancy of 3D into where we are now, texture maps really kind of give detail to everything that you're looking at. You do need the polygons for the motion, but the texture maps are what makes things like just look very nice. And the Dreamcast was holding its own and may have even looked a lot better in some cases than the PlayStation 2 because of that PlayStation 2 error, that their memory problem. But anyway, again, if you're a PlayStation guy, look, we know who won the war, right? I mean, Sega gave it up, threw the towel in, and we have Microsoft that stayed in the game, did just well enough with the Xbox, I think, to keep it going, obviously. But Sony, they had their lunch too. So the original Xbox, this is the box that it came in. I have set up on regular TV in my office, or one of my rooms here, right? And I keep it here, and I've had this thing forever. And you can see here that the case is a little bit up because I modded it at one point. There's some dip switches here, so it can play, it can play pirated games, or if you want to call them backups, if that makes you feel better, it can play those, and it'll also play regular games, and depending on how you toggle this switch. And one of the nice things about the Xbox was the fact that there was a large amount of homebrew going on with this thing because it was close to a PC and it had just enough power in it so that people could make things for it, and it was easily hackable at that point. And so they ended up making Xbox Media Center, and Xbox Media Center, XBMC, may even still be around, but it did kind of spawn off into a couple of different things. One is Plex, and another one is, I forget the name of it right now, but it's the one that everybody uses with their Fire Sticks to watch movies and everything online, etc. And those all kind of spawned from Xbox Media Center that was brought, to life on Homebrew on this original Xbox. So it's kind of interesting how this, became like a media center for people. The thing that Microsoft has struggled and tried to do with the Xbox line since inception. Hackers utilized the hardware in the first one and made a fantastic media center for it, and a lot of people kept it. It was also a great emulation system, and it allowed you to. It has a built-in hard drive, so it allowed you to copy your ROMs over to it, and then play them on a variety of emulators that worked really well. Today, obviously, it's dated hardware. Modern PCs kill it. It's the first Xbox, etc. But it still plays a really good game of Xbox, and I have a number of Xbox games that I still continue to play. I don't even know, is this? Yeah, this isn't even an original controller I have. This is a looks like some kind of Mad Cats or Shark Warrior or something. Sorry, everything's a little dusty. I haven't played these in a while, but I do play them. Pelican or something. So, what does that say? Yeah, Pelican. It originally came with a big controller. I think it has the nickname the Duke or something. And a lot of people complained, because people I like the DualShock and everything. And I like the DualShock. DualShock's all right. But I have big hands, and I didn't really have much of a problem with the controller. The problem, though, that it did have was the same problem that the Dreamcast had, is that it adopted the same feature of taking those really fat memory cards or really fat, modules in order to provide for some extensibility out of the game controller. And where the Dreamcast had the VMU, the visual memory unit, which is kind of a bust of an idea, and they had rumble packs that you could put in the controller, which worked, and were but would have been better just to have been built into the controller. You know what I'm saying? Like, that was one of those evolutionary things where they were trying to figure out, if adding features to the controller, through slots would be the thing people want to do. And then they ultimately, landed on the fact that, we can just, we have a hard drive already. We can save games there. We have this Xbox Live thing that we're going to do. Maybe we'll save games in the cloud at some point. So, we don't really need the slot. And that's kind of where that Duke controller sort of ended up. But going off of, this is all just going off memory. There's plenty of history out there. I know this console works. I use it all the time when I do want to play games on it. So there's no reason for me to kick this on. And I don't think you really want to sit here and watch me play Xbox games. I just wanted to, talk to you a little bit about it. But it's, it's on the list. I have one. I might at some point pick up another one, like maybe one of the limited ones if I find one in a box in really good condition. Because I think like in an aftermarket, like collector's thing, I just tend to think that things that, are not modded are probably going to be more collectible further into the future. And that's a fine line, but I just feel like there are plenty of kits out there to do a lot of different things with a lot of different consoles in order to improve them, improve their screens, give them backlighting, give them, better sound, improve the power and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. If you're using your systems, absolutely, you want to do that. But they're not original at that point, right? They're not how they were originally. And like when you're collecting stuff, you generally want to try to keep things original. There are a few exceptions, which I'll talk about with some consoles coming up in the future. But, in general, people that are collecting stuff kind of want the original hardware as is. Now, I do believe that the console should work. That's the point of this show. Will it work? And if it doesn't, then it makes sense to recap it, repair it. If something's broken in terms, improve it if that's all the options you have, because why have it being broken? and that totally makes sense. But it's just one of those things where if it does work, don't touch it. Like let it go, and whoever wants to buy it someday in the future, they can make the decision if they want to improve it or not. I don't know. It's there's different arguments to that though, but I tend to just side with original hardware is best, and don't try and mess with it too much. But I do appreciate the fact that there are people out there that buy, especially broken systems, and fix them up and put them back for sale. As long as they list the improvements that have been made to it, I think that's totally great, because that gets people playing those systems still, and really sort of improves the market. So anyway, that's the Xbox. We'll move on to the next one, etc. We'll definitely be streaming some more video on some of these consoles, but some of these, if you want to look at Xbox stuff, you can certainly go on YouTube and do a search and find something about the original Xbox and find all sorts of videos of games. Okay, all right, thanks for watching. Let's move on to the next one.